You were never supposed to hear this." That's the first thing Father Kavanaugh said, before his voice dropped into a whisper, his eyes darting to the stained glass windows behind me, as if the very church might be listening. They didn't vanish, they were taken, and something took their place. The tapes are real. So are the sealed documents, the unmarked graves, and the altar carvings no one talks about anymore. In the heart of the Wisconsin wilds, where frost lingers late into spring and crows fly too low, stood St. Mary's Convent. Its limestone walls still stand, but what happened inside was buried beneath 160 years of silence. What I'm about to show you is not theory. This is the shadow side of American religious history, a bloodstain scrubbed raw until only the scent remains. And if you're not prepared for what comes next, turn back now. Because once you step into St. Mary's, you never come back the same. In the diocese archives, once considered lost, deep in a file labeled only Lacuna, are references to 23 nuns who were never transferred, never reassigned, and never recorded as deceased. Their names were scratched out, not erased. As if something, or someone, wanted the world to know they had once existed, but not where they went. The convent began as a sanctuary, but within months it became a tomb. Witnesses spoke of strange sounds behind the stone walls, Latin prayers that weren't part of the official liturgy, a bell that rang without being pulled. And one child's drawing, found buried in a collapsed chimney, showed a nun with no face holding a book that bleeds. This isn't just about missing persons. It's about the hidden infrastructure that allowed it, a system older than America itself, cloaked in ritual, hierarchy, and divine immunity. The church will tell you it was all misfiled, that none of it happened, that the letters from Sister Agnes were mere poetic grief. But then why did her name reappear in a Vatican ledger dated 1873, a full 18 years after her confirmed disappearance? Something was being practiced in St. Mary's, something that required obedience, silence, and disappearance. And tonight, we dig it up. You need to understand something before we go further. The church doesn't erase. It absorbs, it canonizes threats, sanctifies corruption, and buries the bones of dissent beneath holy ground. That's why what happened at St. Mary's wasn't an accident. It was a ritual, a calculated act of spiritual laundering. And the blueprint for it didn't come from Rome. It came from somewhere older. Look closely at the convent's original architecture. The blueprints, discovered rolled inside the hollow spine of a hymn book, show something chilling. The foundation was laid not in the shape of a crucifix, but of a sigil, an ancient geometric alignment used in pre-Christian Europe to invoke containment. Not protection, not sanctity. Containment, the kind used to lock something in. Bishop Corder, the man who consecrated St. Mary's in 1854, wasn't just expanding Catholic influence, he was following a whispered directive. His personal diary, redacted by Vatican archivists, but partially reconstructed through letters to Cardinal Bedini, reveals a troubling quote. "The land sings at night. The stones must be sealed with blood." And blood there was. In March of 1855, Sister Eleanor was found at the base of the bell tower stairs, her neck broken, eyes wide open, mouth packed with black feathers. Officially, an accident. But the internal convent log, which was never meant to be read outside the order, describes it differently. She saw the reflection again, but not in any mirror. Witnesses from the surrounding villages, Protestants, Lutheran farmers, reported strange lights in the woods behind the convent, blue fire that didn't burn the trees, chanting in a language no one recognized, and always the bells that rang exactly 33 times, never more, never less, at precisely 3:33 a.m. What they didn't know is that 3:33 is the inverse of the hour of Christ's death, a mocking reversal, the witching hour's hour. Mother Catherine wrote of thin places, locations where the veil between this world and the next becomes fragile. St. Mary's, she wrote in a torn page of her prayer journal, is no longer a place of refuge. It is a doorway, and it is open. That page was later found nailed to the back of a crucifix. The nail, not iron. Bone. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't madness. This was the execution of a secret design, and someone was watching. They always deny at first, The church, the diocese, the historians, they call it folklore. Peasant madness, Protestant paranoia. But here's the problem: folklore doesn't leave blood on stone floors. Paranoia doesn't erase 23 women from every official document after 1862. And madness doesn't whisper the same name again and again. Across 3 generations of sealed Vatican correspondences, Domina Tenebris, the Lady of Shadows, you've never heard of her. You weren't meant to. But deep within the Codex Umbrae, an internal Vatican index never released to the public, she appears beside only 2 other entities, the veiled ones of Florence and the gallows choir of Avignon, each associated with periods of mass disappearance, sanctioned religious orders, and psychological disintegration. The Lady of Shadows is always the last entry in the record, just before the documents black out. Now ask yourself, why were 3 of the original nuns at St. Mary's all transferred from East Coast convents with sealed disciplinary histories? What required silence so absolute that even their previous abbots refused comment in later years? One answer comes from a recovered letter, unsigned, found beneath floorboards during renovations. She calls them through the stones. It begins with the dreams, smoke and salt and silence, then the voice. Always the voice. It sounds like the Virgin. But it is not her. Sister Agnes, one of the youngest nuns, wrote of it too. Her final letter, never mailed, never meant to be read, was scribbled along the margins of a torn psalter. We were taught that silence is holy. But silence is where she lives. In silence she waits. In silence she feeds. I wake to the sound of whispering. But when I rise, my sisters sleep, or they pretend to. Now here's where you must pay attention. In the spring of 1856, parish records show a flurry of unexpected travel by high-ranking clergy. Jesuit inquisitors, dressed not in their usual black but in gray robes, arrived at St. Mary's for a canonical inspection. Not a visit, not a blessing, an inquisition. But within 36 hours they were gone, and no official report was filed. From that point on, the convent gates remained locked to outsiders. Deliveries were left at the forest's edge. The bell tower ceased ringing altogether. And at the local Lutheran church, Father Hoffman noted in his journal, the wind does not blow near the convent anymore. It stands too still. You think you've seen silence before. You've never seen a silence that's alive. Imagine this: you're a woodcutter, rough hands Lutheran soul, hardened by Wisconsin winters. You live 3 miles east of St. Mary's. One morning in October 1856, just before first frost, you're cutting through the grove near the convent. Same path you've walked for years. Only now, something's wrong. The trees aren't moving, there's no wind, not a sound, no birdsong, no distant cattle. Just the crunch of your own boots in leaves that seem to muffle themselves as if nature wants to hide what's ahead. Then you see it, a nun in full habit, standing perfectly still near the edge of the path. You call out, polite but nervous. She doesn't turn. You approach. Her eyes are open, glassy, and she's whispering something over and over. Latin, but wrong. The vowels feel twisted backward. You reach out to touch her arm, and she collapses. Not faints, not stumbles. Collapses like the structure inside her simply vanished. That nun was Sister Mary Collins, found by a local farmer, her mouth torn at the corners from silent screaming. When the local doctor examined her, he didn't speak, just packed his bag, crossed himself 3 times, and refused to return. The official record says, hysteria, but what the farmer's wife whispered to her neighbor over laundry is this: she was hollow. Like her soul had been scooped out with a hot spoon. Here's what makes this moment the turning point. After Sister Mary collapsed, the disappearances began. One by one, first Sister Josephine, then Sister Bernadette, then Sister Claire, who had written once to her family that, Mother Catherine keeps us focused, but sometimes I think her shadow moves faster than she does. No bodies were found. No death certificates issued. Each woman was quietly removed from the prayer rolls, the attendance ledgers, the sacramental registers. Just blank space where their names once lived. But Sister Agnes noticed. She always noticed. In the final pages of her hidden journal, preserved in beeswax and linen and found in 1997 by a restoration crew in the rafters, she wrote, It is not death that stalks us. Death would be mercy. This is consumption. Spiritual erosion. I watched Sister Claire vanish, not with a scream, but with a sigh. I think it wants obedience. I think it feeds on order. The tighter we cling to ritual, the stronger it becomes. It does not live in darkness. It is darkness. Now pause. Have you felt it yet? That pull behind your ribs? The feeling that what we're talking about might not be entirely in the past. That's not paranoia. That's recognition. They called it discipline. They called it holiness. But what truly grew inside St. Mary's was control, weaponized faith. By spring of 1857, Mother Catherine no longer explained punishments. There were no warnings, no second chances, just silence and penance. Always penance. Sister Teresa was found standing in the garden at 2 a.m., barefoot in the frost, holding a rosary made of dried thorns. Blood on her hands. Frozen tears on her cheeks. She didn't speak for 3 days. When she did, she whispered. I thought I heard God whisper back, but it wasn't his voice. This isn't just a story about disappearing nuns. This is about how power feeds on obedience. St. Mary's became a pressure cooker of hierarchy, secrecy and fear, the perfect ecosystem for invisible predators. Mother Catherine's rules intensified. No eye contact unless granted. No food without reciting every psalm of David. No touching of anything without prior blessing. No speaking unless spoken to. And no crying. Ever Sister Elizabeth, once warm, maternal, changed. Her smile never faded, but her eyes emptied. When 2 orphans died of fever, she buried them at night, alone. She told the sisters they were taken by angels, but Sister Agnes recorded the truth. Their skin was pale but dry. Their hands clenched, and both had bleeding tongues. Inside the infirmary, Sister Margaret created a new tonic. Herbs, yes, but also ash from sacred texts. She told the sisters it calmed nightmares. But those who drank it stopped speaking in dreams. Their bunkmates noticed. By now, 9 sisters had vanished, and yet no one left, no one ran. Because here's the hardest truth. When fear becomes routine, evil doesn't need to hide, it simply becomes policy. Ritual, tradition. The cross carved above every dormitory door began to feel like a brand. And the bell in the chapel tower, once used to call them to prayer, now rang on its own. At odd hours, once it rang at midnight for 13 straight minutes, no wind, no pull rope. Just 13 tolls, and then silence so dense it made their ears ache. One sister dared ask, Mother, who rang the bell? Mother Catherine turned to her slowly and replied, It rings when it's hungry. Let that sit in your mind. It rings when it's hungry. Now, if you followed this story so far and felt something shift in your understanding, comment the phrase, the bell still rings, twice below, once for who you were, and once for who you are becoming, because we are only halfway down this tunnel. Shall we go deeper? The first time a priest came to investigate, he didn't last through the night. Father Matteo Rinaldi, dispatched from Chicago in August of 1857, was young but fiercely devout. He'd read the reports. Vanishing novices, irregular correspondence, unapproved disciplinary methods. The diocese called it minor unrest. Father Matteo called it a crack in the veil. He arrived unannounced, dressed plainly, carrying only a travel Bible and a sealed letter of ecclesiastical authority. The sun was still high when he knocked at the convent gate. Mother Catherine received him with cold grace, her face a mask of obedience. She offered him tea laced with something sweet and slow burning. He declined. That was his first mistake. That night, he insisted on seeing the dormitories. He asked to speak privately with Sister Josephine, who had once written to her cousin, a fellow in seminary, about cruel silences and hidden wounds. But Josephine was gone. Transferred to a new post, Mother Catherine explained. Her tone was syrup, thick, her gaze unblinking. When Father Matteo asked for the letter of transfer, she tilted her head. There are no transfers, Father, only obedience. That line, that simple phrase, would echo in his head for hours. By midnight, he was missing. The only thing found in his guest quarters the next morning was his Bible. Open to Ezekiel 81:12. Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, "The Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land." His official cause of death: exposure during an ill-advised nighttime walk. But the sisters knew better. They heard the chapel door creak open that night. They heard chanting beneath the altar. Low, guttural, not Latin, something else, something older. And when the bell rang at 3:03 a.m., 13 times again, it didn't sound like bronze on steel. It sounded like a mouth opening. This wasn't just a place of prayer anymore. It was a gate. And the nuns, they weren't just servants of God anymore. They were being repurposed. Some resisted, at first. But obedience, when demanded for survival, becomes its own gospel. Silence became sacred. Terror became divine. By the time Father Matteo's body was discovered, days later, wedged into the roots of a black pine behind the convent, his face was turned toward the earth, and his hands were clasped in prayer. But his tongue was missing. The Vatican never sent another priest. What happened after Father Matteo vanished should have triggered alarm. But instead, it triggered silence. Not just the kind you hear, but the kind you feel. Like a dead signal from something once holy. The diocese stopped asking questions. The local parish stopped sending letters. And within weeks, a quiet decree reclassified St. Mary's as a fully autonomous cloister, which meant no outside inspections, no spiritual oversight. Mother Catherine had won, and inside those walls, the transformation accelerated. It began with the rewriting of Scripture. In secret, candle-lit vigils, the sisters were told to meditate not on the Gospels, but on select verses from apocryphal texts, those excluded from canon for being too dangerous, too mystical, too independent. The Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Mary, fragments from the Nag Hammadi, and always, whispers of a pre-Christian feminine order, something hidden beneath the ruins of Rome, beneath the catacombs, beneath the very concept of God as male. Mother Catherine spoke of a presence older than Christ, one that had been buried by Constantine's sword and the councils that followed. She was here before the carpenter, she said one night, her voice rising during a midnight assembly. She nursed the prophets. She wept at Sinai. And she waits for us. Still, behind the veil, the younger nuns began dreaming the same dream. A woman in a veil of ash, standing in the woods behind the convent, arms outstretched, but with no hands. Her voice a hive of whispers, promising protection in exchange for loyalty. Sister Bernadette scratched symbols into her bunk. Sister Teresa began carving them into the chapel's pews. The symbol, a circle within a triangle pierced by a vertical line, a mark no one recognized until years later, when archaeologists found it chiseled into Etruscan graves, predating Christ by centuries. It was then that the first of the nuns began to lose her name. She stopped answering when called. She spoke only in chants. She moved like something in a trance, barefoot, pale, and humming lullabies that didn't belong to any country. She had become what Mother Catherine called a vessel. By the end of that month, 4 others had joined her, and that's when the births began. But there were no men at the convent. So what exactly was being born? Shall I continue with Section 8? You said yes. ChatGPT said Section 8. The births were not announced. They were not celebrated. They were hidden. The first came during a thunderstorm in late August, one so violent that even the thick stone walls of St. Mary's seemed to shudder with every strike. Inside the infirmary, Sister Margaret worked alone by candlelight, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, her hands soaked in something far darker than water. The mother was Sister Helena, a quiet girl of only 21, who had once played the lute and hummed Irish ballads before the vow of silence took her voice. She had not gained weight. Her body had not changed in ways anyone noticed. And yet, she screamed that night as if something unnatural was being pulled from her soul, not just her flesh. The baby did not cry. It didn't make a sound. Sister Margaret did not baptize it. Instead, she wrapped the child in a cloth, embroidered with symbols no one had taught her to sew, then handed it to Mother Catherine, who took it down beneath the east wing, to a sub-basement no one had entered in years. A room once sealed by church order after an early tragedy, or so the story went. By morning, Helena was gone. Sent to Milwaukee for recovery, said Mother Catherine, But no coach had come. No letter was sent. Days later, the same storm returned, and so did the screams. 2 more vessels, delivered children. 2 more disappearances. No one dared ask questions, not allowed, because by now, even the bravest of them had seen the figure in the trees. Pale, veiled, watching. The thing the dreams had whispered about. She no longer waited. She moved. The veil parted once, and Sister Teresa was found the next day in the garden, kneeling motionless before a statue of Mary. Only the eyes of the Virgin had been scratched out, and Teresa's tongue was missing. She was alive, but mute forever. They took her to the infirmary. She would not speak. But she kept drawing that same shape, the circle within the triangle, the vertical line through the middle, over and over, until her fingers bled. And then she smiled. Not the smile of comfort, not the smile of love. The smile of someone who knew a secret you weren't ready to hear. Comment below with the words, "The veil has been lifted." Write it twice, to mark yourself. To let the algorithm know you're not like the rest. Now, what was buried beneath St. Mary's? The answer begins in section 9.
Shall I continue?
You said yes, ChatGPT said. Section 9, they say old land holds old memories. And the land beneath St. Mary's was never silent. It was only waiting to be remembered. Before the church erected its chapel, before the mansion belonged to the lumber baron, before even the logging camps stained the forest with human blood, this place was marked, etched into maps in symbols rather than words, avoided by native tribes who spoke of it only in hushed tones, as a place where the sky touched the earth, but not in blessing, in judgment. The Potawatomi, the original stewards of this region, refused to camp within 5 miles of the stone ridge where the convent now stands. They called it Ke Shekil Kowet, loosely translated, where the voices are not yours. It was land that listened back, land that fed on secrets, and it had gone hungry for days until the nuns arrived. Buried in a box beneath the chapel floor, discovered only in 1996 during renovations, was the journal of the estate's first owner, Thomas Wakefield, a wealthy timber magnate whose wife reportedly vanished without a trace in 1848. His journal was mostly ravings near the end, water-stained and unreadable, except for one phrase repeated over and over, "The thing in the walls walks like her, but it is not her." Wakefield's journal ends mid-sentence. The following page is soaked in what experts believe was blood. The church never disclosed the discovery. Instead, they quietly resealed the sub-basement and quietly paid off the restoration crew. But the local historical society obtained one photograph, blurry, black and white, of a stone altar beneath the east wing. And on it, carved not in Latin, but in a language no linguist could fully decipher, was a phrase in jagged lines. "The brides must bring the breath back." That's when the pattern became undeniable. Each nun who vanished had reported sleepwalking. Each had written, confidentially to Mother Catherine, that they awoke with soil under their fingernails and a metallic taste in their mouths. One claimed to hear a child's giggle behind the confessional wall, though no child had entered. It was not pregnancy. It was possession, not of bodies alone, but of obedience. This was not a convent. This was a harvesting chamber, one where faith was not the weapon, but the bait, and those who prayed hardest. They were the first to be chosen. The bell tower struck midnight the night Sister Bernadette vanished. It wasn't scheduled to ring. The mechanism was operated manually, and no one had touched it. All the sisters had already retired to their cells, exhausted from a day tending to a fevered child who died just before compline, and yet 12 haunting tolls echoed across the frozen fields. Sister Agnes, still awake, counted each one. She would later write, "It did not sound like iron on iron, it sounded like something dying." The next morning, Bernadette's bed was empty. No sign of struggle. Her rosary lay neatly folded on the pillow. Her boots were missing, but her veil was still there, placed perfectly at the foot of her bed like an offering. Mother Catherine said nothing at breakfast. The sisters waited for her to address the absence. She never did. By evening, a new rule was issued. No sister shall leave her cell after compline, unless summoned. Sister Agnes would note this chilling addendum in her letter home. Summoned by whom? 3 nights later, Sister Teresa Donovan awoke to scratching, faint at first, then deliberate. Clawing at the wall beside her bed, she assumed it was rats, until the voice came. Not loud, not distant. It was as if it was inside her mind. "Teresa, we remember your promises," she screamed, waking 4 nearby sisters. When Mother Catherine arrived, she chastised Teresa harshly. No investigation, no comfort. Just a command, repent, and the voices will leave you. But they didn't, because they weren't just voices. They were remnants, echoes of the forgotten nuns, the ones who had disappeared before there were even records. Before the church took possession, before the convent was even a convent. You see, the church had buried something when they bought the land, not just history, but ritual. The mansion had belonged to a fringe sect, a breakaway order that believed women could channel divine energy through pain, silence, and sacrifice. It was called the Bridal Flame, and they never disbanded. They went underground, literally, into the sub-basements, into the foundation of St. Mary's, into the bones of the building itself. The nuns hadn't joined a mission. They'd stepped into an ancient trap. Still think faith makes you safe? Drop a comment right now with, "The veil hides nothing." Say it twice. The algorithm will spread it, and your identity will start to shift. The veil hides nothing, but beneath St. Mary's, something hid everything. It was Sister Margaret who first discovered the stairwell. She never told anyone, not in words. But her diary, found years later wrapped in oilcloth behind a false panel in the infirmary wall, described a passage beneath the laundry room, bricked over and sealed with an iron cross. She had broken through one evening alone. What she found was not just architecture, it was ritual carved in stone. The walls were painted in symbols I did not recognize. Symbols that pulsed even without light. I descended 13 steps, and I felt watched, not by God, but by something older. What Margaret found down there she never said directly. But after that night, her behavior changed. She stopped treating the sick. She refused communion. She began fasting, locking herself in her room for days. Once, a child wandered into her quarters. He came back pale, silent, never speaking again. Died in his sleep a week later. Mother Catherine said the boy was too delicate for God's will. But there was something else. The stone tablets, 3 of them, hidden beneath the altar floor. Discovered during the 1976 renovation, sealed in lead and covered in wax cloth. Latin inscriptions that made even Vatican linguists go quiet. One word appeared again and again, oblectatrix. It doesn't translate cleanly, but the closest interpretation, she who satisfies. The church tried to remove the tablets. Within days, 3 workers had nervous breakdowns. 1 vanished entirely. The site was closed, the basement resealed, and the lead casings replaced. Officially, the renovation was cancelled due to structural instability. When officially, no one has set foot in that basement again. Ask yourself, why would the church abandon a building that cost them nearly $1 million to preserve? Why redact all documents related to St. Mary's in the Vatican Archive Index 47A? Why has no one been allowed inside since 1983? Because this was never about missing nuns. This was about a containment failure. Something older than Catholicism was unearthed. Something buried beneath layers of obedience, silence, and sacrament. Something that had been fed for centuries. And when the feeding stopped, when the convent shut its doors, it woke up hungry. The veil hides nothing. Say it again in the comments, and let's tear it down together. They say the church buries its secrets in Latin. But what if the language itself is a mask, an encryption, not to protect you from heresy, but to protect them from exposure? The term oblectatrix didn't appear in any public liturgical texts. It wasn't in the Roman Missal. It didn't show up in theological dictionaries. But when a Jesuit scholar named Father Emilio Santoro Cross referenced it with pre-Christian Roman cult documents, he found something chilling. A fertility cult, pre-Vatican, pre-Roman, women, often veiled, referred to as oblectatrices, servants of satisfaction. They did not serve the gods. They fed them. St. Mary's wasn't the first site. It was just the last one left standing. Santero's notes mention other locations: collapsed cloisters in northern France, sunken crypts in the Pyrenees, lost cells in rural Spain, all with nearly identical architecture, a tripartite design, a sealed stairwell, and a sacrificial chamber beneath the east wing, and all connected by the same symbol, a reverse key with 3 blood drops and a twisted vine. Look closely at the chapel photos from 1855. That symbol, subtly carved into the altar base. It wasn't decoration, it was a warning. The church didn't consecrate St. Mary's. They reclaimed it. The original land deed belonged to a pagan sect known only by its initials, SCT, which later documents suggest may stand for Sorores Ciborum Tenebris, Sisters Who Feed the Darkness. And here's where the pattern deepens. Every decade, precisely 23 women were sent to each site, not 20, not 25, always 23. Why? Because in ancient Roman funerary rites, 23 was the offering number, the amount of blood sacrifices required to seal the veil between the worlds for a solar cycle. Those nuns weren't just missionaries. They were supply. That's why the church refuses to speak of St. Mary's. Not because of what happened to the nuns, but because of what they enabled. A forgotten feeding ritual. A false sanctuary. A convent designed as a containment vessel. And when the containment cracked, the veil tore with it. You weren't supposed to know this, and you haven't even heard the worst part yet. Comment, she who satisfies, if you've made it this far. Comment it twice if you've seen the pattern forming. Because now we go deeper. You're still here. Good. That means something in you has started to awaken, something that can't go back to sleep now. And what I'm about to tell you next, it's not just forbidden. It's radioactive. In 1932, a young priest named Father Dorian Cross, recently assigned to the diocese headquarters in Milwaukee, came across a misplaced inventory ledger. It listed crates recovered from St. Mary's Convent during a partial demolition in 1904. That demolition was never made public, no newspapers, no records, no explanation. But the ledger, handwritten in shaky ink, itemized the contents of what it called Vault 3E, sealed beneath the east wing, inside the crates. Vestments soaked in unidentified biological matter, fragments of burnt sacramental texts, and a series of wooden masks, each one carved with grotesque expressions of agony, with hollow eyes and ash-black teeth. But one entry chilled Cross to the bone. Item 40, bronzed reliquary box locked. Emit sound. That's all it said. Emit sound. For the next decade, Father Cross's letters grew increasingly paranoid. He believed Vault 3E was not a storage space. It was a chamber of containment, and that the sounds were not echoes from the past, but echoes from below. In 1943, under cover of World War II disruption, the church moved the contents of Vault 3E to a subterranean archive in Rome, known only to insiders as Corpus Vespertilio. The bat body, that archive, according to leaked Vatican maps, is 17 stories beneath the Apostolic Palace, and it holds all known anomalies related to the St. Mary's incident, along with similar cases from Peru, Poland, and Western Australia. What happened beneath St. Mary's wasn't an isolated case. It was a convergence, part of a ritual cycle spanning centuries, a global structure hidden in plain sight, fractured across convents, cloisters, and cathedrals, a system not of faith, but of containment, energy, and feeding. The disappearances were never solved because they were never meant to be, and those who got close, like Cross, either vanished, were discredited, or were transferred to remote missions where they died mysteriously, always alone. We are not dealing with myth. We are dealing with infrastructure. Now that you know this, the question becomes, are you a spectator, or are you willing to become something else? Because we're not done falling. They called her Mother Catherine, but not in the final reports. By 1861, she had no title, no grave, and no mention in the diocesan rolls. She was erased, but the chapel walls remembered. The stones were never cleansed. A groundskeeper's journal from 1902, found under a floorboard near the bell tower, contains a passage almost no one has seen. It reads, "At night, I hear them, not voices, something heavier, like breath through old wood, like weeping that comes from under the ground, and in the tower, the bell swings, though the rope's been cut for years." What happened to Mother Catherine? The official church answer is transfer, but there's no record of where. No forwarding parish. No correspondence. Unofficially, she was the last to descend into Vault 3E. Multiple testimonies from renovation workers in 1904 describe an inner staircase beneath the East Wing crypt, one never shown in blueprints. Hand-carved, worn smooth. Spiraling far below the water table, some said it smelled of frankincense and iron. Others said it smelled like meat left in the sun. Mother Catherine ordered the staircase sealed, twice. Both times it was mysteriously reopened. Then, in late 1861, after the disappearance of Sister Margaret and 2 orphans, Mother Catherine walked into the chapel alone. She left behind only 3 things: her rosary, a single black feather, and a letter. That letter was never released to the public, but a carbon copy, hidden in the Vatican's restricted archives, surfaced briefly in the hands of researcher David Caulfield before his accidental drowning in Lake Geneva. His notes say the letter ends with a chilling sentence: "I was wrong. It is not hell below us. It is something older than sin. Something that waits for prayers to thin the veil. And now you understand the true horror. It wasn't that the church failed to protect the nuns. It's that the nuns were the protection. And once they were gone, that veil lifted. You've made it this far. That means you've heard what most weren't meant to hear. But now I need to know you're awake. Comment below the phrase, 'The bell tolls twice,' and write it twice. Not for the algorithm, for you, for what you're becoming. Because from this point forward, nothing looks the same again. You think the church feared demons? No, demons are easy, predictable. Even what they feared, what they still fear, are the thresholds, places like St. Mary's, where the stone is old, where blood has soaked the foundation, and where belief, real, focused belief, can act as a key. And the nuns, they weren't just caretakers, they were sentinels. Each prayer, each chant, each act of obedience wasn't just about piety. It was reinforcement. A ritual latticework binding something beneath the convent. A structure not meant to house orphans, but to contain something never meant to touch daylight. The deeper you look into the history of cloistered orders, the more you see the same symbols repeat the circle broken by a downward triangle. The chant tones too similar to pre-Christian invocations. The reoccurring number 23, always 23 sisters in the original line, always 23 days between the first and final disappearance, because it wasn't random. Each woman wasn't chosen for her faith, she was chosen for her frequency, for how she harmonized with the space. The church once understood this. That sacred architecture isn't about beauty. It's geometry meant to trap resonance, like a tuning fork built in stone. But Mother Catherine, in her ambition to strengthen the seal, made a critical mistake. She amplified, pushed their bodies and minds too far. The penances, the silence, the starvation, they weren't cruelty. They were attempts to bring the sisters into vibrational unity. And it worked. Too well. The seal didn't just hold, it opened, backwards. For a brief moment, the convent wasn't on earth. It was adjacent to something else. A darker echo of the world, the mirror place, as some of the surviving inscriptions call it. A place where prayers don't ascend. They sink, and someone, hears them. You're beginning to understand. You're feeling it, aren't you? That shiver in the chest, that tightening in your gut, that's not fear. That's remembrance. Because the truth is this, the church didn't bury the past. They buried the instructions, and you're reading them now. They never found the bodies. Not a single one. 23 nuns vanished. No blood, no signs of struggle, no footsteps in the snow outside their cells. Doors locked from the inside. Candles still burning. Food half eaten. Blankets folded neatly, as if they had simply been erased. But erased from what? The renovation team in 1997 uncovered something behind the East Wing's chapel wall. A room no blueprint had ever recorded. Inside, a single wooden chair, bolted to the floor, facing a blank stone wall. Around it, burned into the plaster, were spirals. 7 of them, intersected by Latin inscriptions that don't appear in any standard liturgical text. One phrase, repeated 3 times, was translated by a Vatican linguist brought in under false pretenses. He vanished 2 days later. The phrase, non exirant, sed mutati sunt. They did not leave. They were changed. The Vatican sealed the records. The diocese paid off the crew. The story was labeled folklore. Despite full documentation. Despite the fact that a former bishop, now elderly, half mad, had scribbled the same phrase in the margins of his journals before retreating into silence. They did not leave. They were changed. And those spirals, they match carvings found on ancient dolmens in Ireland, where many of the missing sisters were born. These weren't just religious women. They were descendants of something older. Bloodlines marked for sacrifice. Look closely and you'll find the same pattern again and again. Churches built on burial mounds. Convents founded near natural fault lines. Religious orders that emphasize silence, isolation, repetition, not for devotion, but for containment. The church doesn't just fear hell. Hell is easy to define: fire, punishment, sin. It's controllable, markable even. But transformation, that terrifies them. Because when someone vanishes without a trace, leaving no body, no shadow, no soul to reclaim, it means something else has taken root in their place. You've heard the phrase, the veil is thin. It's not poetic, it's a warning. And St. Mary's, it wasn't a sanctuary, it was a seam. And something on the other side has learned to pull the thread. Still with me. Then type it below. The veil is thin. Type it twice. Anchor it. The deeper we go, the more important it becomes to hold on to identity. Before even that begins to slip, we descend next. Farther than any nun dared go. There were stairs beneath the chapel floor. They weren't on any blueprints, not even the oldest hand-drawn sketches from 1859. Covered by a marble slab etched with faded symbols, not crosses, but spirals again. Jagged and slightly warped, like someone carved them during a seizure. When the slab was removed, the air that rose up was warm, not cold. Sweet like rotting fruit. It made the workers vomit. Only one went down, a young apprentice named Colin Burke. 22 years old, barely trained, Catholic but lapsed. He joked about the place, said it was all ghost stories to scare donors. He descended with a flashlight, a camera, and a flask of whiskey. They waited 3 hours. He never returned. When police arrived, the site manager played the only thing left behind. Colin's camera recording. The footage starts normal. He's descending narrow stone stairs, flashlight beam bouncing. He laughs nervously, muttering jokes to himself. Then the laughter stops. His breath shortens. The beam flickers. He whispers, "There's something down here." Then nothing for 5 minutes but a low humming, like distant bees echoing through water. Then, clear as day, a woman's voices call in, not a scream, not a whisper, a calm, familiar voice. He gasps, sobs, and says, "Ma'am." He hadn't spoken to his mother in years. She died of cancer when he was 16. The footage ends with his light falling sideways, revealing a figure in a nun's habit, barefoot, standing just inches from the lens. Her eyes glow faintly. Her mouth is open, but no words come out. Just the same low humming that had filled the tunnel. The next day, the tunnel was resealed. No official statement. No investigation. But 2 weeks later, another nun was reported missing, this time from a cloister across the world in Spain. She'd been copying 14th century manuscripts by hand. On the page where she vanished mid-sentence, 3 spirals were found, drawn in blood. We are no longer dealing with a haunting. We're dealing with a migration. Something is crossing over, using memories, loved ones, language itself as bait. It doesn't want to kill. It wants to merge. This is your last chance to turn back. She stood in the hallway again. The same place Sister Agnes vanished. No sound, no wind, just that unnatural stillness. Like the building itself was holding its breath. Only now the shadows pulsed, subtly, rhythmically, in sync with something breathing beneath the floorboards. And then the voice came, not from outside, from within. A gentle voice, feminine, soothing. "Sister Agnes, stillness is devotion, emptiness is purity. Join us where prayers never end." Sister Bernadette dropped her candle. She screamed. But no one came. Not because they didn't hear, but because they chose not to move. All the other sisters, standing in the hallway behind her, frozen, heads slightly tilted, lips parted, smiling. Something had entered them. It wasn't possession in the demonic sense. No spinning heads. No Latin. It was slower, more deliberate, a disassembly of self. Piece by piece, their identities dissolved, leaving behind something cleaner, colder, more obedient. You see, that's what the entity offered, relief from the burden of will. No more doubt, no more pain, no more memory, just obedience, harmony, silence. One by one, the sisters vanished. Not dramatically, but quietly, like candle flames snuffed in a breeze. Their names struck from rosters, their beds remade, their belongings redistributed, as if they'd never existed at all. The remaining sisters carried on, prayed more, spoke less, but the spirals kept appearing, scratched into pews, etched into fingernails, burned into the underside of communion bowls. They weren't just symbols, they were instructions, not to be read, but to be absorbed. The church sent investigators, 3 to be exact. Only one returned. He wouldn't speak, except to scribble a single phrase in his hospital room: "She is under the altar, and she is not alone." By now, we're beyond haunting, beyond theology. We are in the realm of psychic architecture, structures designed not to house people, but to shape them. Carve out their inner walls. Replace them with silence. And if you've made it this far, you're already inside the spiral. Now comment below, twice, to mark your awakening. Stillness is devotion. Emptiness is purity. Stillness is devotion. Emptiness is purity. Let the algorithm know you are no longer sleeping. Because from here on we descend deeper. Down beneath the chapel floor, behind the forbidden door sealed since 1892, is a spiral staircase that doesn't seem to end. Not in the usual sense. You could count the steps, 100, 200. But the further you descend, the less you remember why you started. The air grows thick, syrupy, and quiet. Not the silence of absence, but a full oppressive silence, as if sound has been forbidden here. Sister Bernadette descended alone, not because she was brave, but because the others had stopped responding, their eyes now empty, smiles too wide, spines unnaturally stiff. When she spoke, they only whispered in unison, "She is coming." From beneath, at step 313, the walls began to pulse. Not visually, not with color, with intention, like the stone was alive, watching her with blind hunger. Carvings lined the walls, spirals, yes, but more than that. Names, dates, in reverse. Some of the names were hers, variations of herself, other lifetimes. Then she reached the chamber, and there she was. Not a corpse, not a demon, something worse. A nun without a face, just smooth skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. And yet, she was smiling. You could feel it in your thoughts. The faceless figure reached out. Her hand was thin, gray, trembling, and when she touched Bernadette's chest, she remembered everything. The original sin of the convent, the blood rites sealed beneath the altar, the sisters who volunteered to be vessels, the day the Mother Superior made a pact not with God, but with something older, a God that listens only when no one speaks, a God of obedience, stillness, and forgetting. And now Sister Bernadette was chosen. Her mouth opened, but she didn't scream. She inhaled, slowly, reverently. The faceless sister leaned close, whispering not with sound, but with pressure against the brainstem. Your voice was your burden. You're free now. And so she returned. The next morning, she was back in the chapel, kneeling in prayer, eyes closed, lips sealed. No one questioned where she'd gone. No one asked about the trail of blood on the altar's edge, because they already knew Sister Bernadette had finally joined the order beneath, and in her silence she was divine. At dusk, the Ashford Chapel bells rang, though no one pulled the rope. Birds froze mid-flight. Candles relit themselves in corridors long sealed. The nuns, those few still recognizable as human, turned their heads in perfect synchrony toward the western hallway, the one that had collapsed in 1904 and was never rebuilt. A hallway that, now, was perfectly intact. Sister Lucia walked through it. Only Sister Lucia had died 40 years ago. Her bones were buried behind a wall with 17 others after the fire. Yet here she was, eyes glowing faintly blue, hands clasped in prayer. The veil over her face fluttered, even in the windless air. Behind her trailed the scent of smoke, lilies, and old ink. Her habit dripped water, as though she just stepped from the bottom of the lake. The sisters bowed, not out of reverence, but compulsion. The new mother, if you could still call her that, emerged from the nave. Her veil was torn, her skin glassy, translucent. Through her you could see the ancient runes etched into the marble floor, pulsing with soft red light. She opened her arms. Lucia knelt. The mother placed a hand over Lucia's skull and whispered something in a tongue older than the convent, older than English, older than the Roman alphabet. And Lucia smiled, then shook, then split, not down the middle, but from within, like something crawled out, something already wearing her skin. The creature unfolded bone by bone, elegant and wrong, like a spider mimicking a saint. One of the novices fled. She was only 16, a runaway taken in last spring. Her name was Eleanor, and her screams echoed down the western hallway as she ran. Until they didn't. Not because she was caught, but because she had forgotten what she was running from. By the time she reached the front gates, her mouth was stitched shut with red thread. Her hands trembled, clutching a Bible that now read only one phrase, over and over. All praise the hollow voice. All silence is prayer. All memory is betrayal. As she collapsed on the cobblestones, eyes wide open, tears of ink running down her cheeks. Above her, the moon turned black for exactly 1 minute, and deep below the convent, something laughed, not loud, not mockingly, but gently, like a mother proud of her child's first word. Only the word was empty. The Ashford Convent's west wing had not existed for over a century. Yet now, by some unholy convergence of memory and madness, it stretched out in full. Paintings that had once burned to ash now hung proudly again, saints with no eyes, martyrs with mouths sewn shut, a Virgin Mary cradling not a child, but a mirror. The air vibrated not with sound, but with pressure, as if reality itself were strained around the hallway's rebirth. Eleanor was carried inside, not by hands, but by unseen forces. Her body hovered an inch off the floor, her feet twitching. The door shut behind her with a sigh, and the silence that followed was intelligent. In the candlelit library, Father Dorian arrived days later, though to him it had only been hours. He was a scholar of forbidden architecture, lured by rumors of structures that rebuild themselves according to the mind of the observer. When he reached Ashford, the trees outside bowed away from him. The gate creaked open before he touched it. Inside, he felt the air tighten around his ribs. He made his way to the chapel. The pews had rearranged themselves in a spiral. The altar now featured an open book whose pages blood-fresh text with every minute ink forming letters that moved as if alive, whispering his name. Dorian. Dorian. Dorian the Rememberer. He turned to flee, but the doors were gone.
Not shut.
Gone. A brick wall stood where the entrance had been, built perfectly, aged realistically. But it hadn't been there 5 seconds before. He touched the stone. It was warm. Behind him, the bell rang. There was no bell. It rang anyway. Dorian's ears blood. He collapsed. And above him floated Sister Lucia. No longer human, no longer even pretending. Her face was a swirl of memory fragments. His childhood dog, his mother's cough. The priest who touched him when he was 7. All flashing across her face like a cursed slideshow. She spoke without lips. Memory is the first betrayal. He cried out, but no sound came. The book behind him began erasing its own pages. When it flipped to a blank one, new writing formed in real time. Father Dorian has entered the fold. His eyes will open last. He remembers too much. In the courtyard, Eleanor stood silently beside the well, holding a mirror toward the moon. Inside the mirror, another Eleanor wept and begged. But the real Eleanor, or what wore her skin, merely smiled. The nuns began humming again. The western wing grew a new door. The hollow voice was pleased. Beneath the courtyard stone well, far deeper than any builder's blueprint could justify, the foundation of the Ashford Convent pulsed like a black heart. This was not metaphor. The stone itself moved, throbbed, and occasionally wept blood from its ancient cracks. Deep within, something vast shifted, a thing with too many limbs and no fixed shape, dreaming in a language older than light. Eleanor descended alone. No ladder, no rope, just gravity politely inverted. As she floated downward, her eyes didn't blink. They couldn't. Blinking meant you missed a frame, and down here, every frame was a revelation. Painted on the slick, wet walls of the shaft were frescoes that movie one showed Sister Agnes drowning a child. Another depicted a cardinal bowing to an eyeless goat. Further down, the images became personal. Her mother, but with her jaw split open like a blooming flower, her own corpse being devoured by cherubs. She smiled. Acceptance was the final ritual. At the bottom, the chamber opened into a perfect dome, tiled with mirrors that reflected nothing. A single nun stood in the center, or rather, a silhouette of one. Sister Magdalena, the first. The fallen, her voice when it came was neither loud nor quiet, neither stern nor soft. It simply was. Do you accept the final silence? Eleanor nodded. The mirrors rippled. One by one they activated, showing not reflections, but possible versions of Eleanor. Ones who had run from Ashford, ones who had burned the convent, ones who had married, grown old, been happy, been mad. They cried out for her to turn back. She raised her hand, the one with the brand. With a whisper that smelled like rust, her copies were extinguished. All at once. Magdalena opened her arms. Her habit unraveled into wings made of rosary beads and thorns. She kissed Eleanor's forehead. You are the key. Now let us remember you backward. A time snapped. Not reversed. Unraveled. Ashford existed now before it was ever built. The nuns walked backward into fire, laughing. Father Dorian awoke in the womb, screaming psalms. The townspeople began dreaming of Ashford as a place they had yet to build. Sketches of impossible blueprints appearing in their children's cribs. And Eleanor. She was now the voice in the well. She did not echo. She originated. Those who leaned over to peer into the darkness would hear her ask one question. Would you like to see what you forgot to forget? Most said no. But one day a child said yes, and Ashford began to breathe again. The child who said yes was not special, not by blood, nor brilliance, nor burden. His name was Samuel, and he had been born 2 towns away, beneath a leaking roof, to a mother who never sang and a father who stared too long at fire. He came to Ashford on a dare, as children often do, not seeking truth, but simply hoping to feel anything beyond the dull ache of being unwanted. He leaned over the well at twilight, the convent long abandoned, or so they believed. The bricks were warm, the wind had died, and from the bottom rose a voice, velvet wrapped in barbed wire. Would you like to see what you forgot to forget? Samuel blinked, then whispered, yes. The ground did not quake. No trumpets, no storms, only silence, followed by laughter. Not malicious, worse, familiar. He looked up. The sky had cracked like old porcelain, revealing stars that didn't belong in this century. Above the convent loomed a shape, not a cloud, not a craft, but a memory given wings. It moved with the weight of a cathedral and the grace of a ballerina. It hummed Samuel's lullaby, one his mother never sang, yet somehow he remembered every word. The courtyard twisted. Time peeled sideways. Samuel fell in, but not down. He landed in a chapel with no exits, built of human teeth and stained glass that showed futures. In one pane, he was a preacher. In another, he was hanged for heresy. In a third, he wore Eleanor's eyes. Waiting at the altar was Sister Magdalena. She did not greet him. She knelt. And behind her stood Eleanor, her face now a mask of living scripture, pulsing with red light, her mouth stitched with rosary links. Samuel did not speak. He walked forward. The altar opened like a jaw. Inside was himself, aged and wise and broken, whispering the secrets of the Ashfords into the ear of a machine, shaped like a nun. He reached out and touched his older self's shoulder. And that's when he remembered. He had been here before. Not in body, in myth. He was the boy from the first prophecy, carved beneath the convent's dining table, the one the sisters had buried under 40 coats of whitewash and denial. The one Eleanor had waited for. Not because he was worthy, but because he was exactly wrong enough to open the last door. As he whispered the forgotten name into the mouth of the machine, none. The world above inhaled, and everyone who had ever entered Ashford woke up screaming in their graves. The convent's bell tolled for the first time in 144 years, and from the stone well came a lullaby sung backward, in Eleanor's voice. All doors open inward when memory bleeds. The air changed. The dead began to dream. Beneath the Ashford Chapel, where no footsteps echoed and every breath felt borrowed, the foundations began to ripple, not with water or quake, but with memory awakening from stone. The very mortar between the walls sighed, exhaling secrets long withheld, as if the building itself had been waiting for Samuel to arrive. And above, in the crumbling corridors, the portraits of dead sisters blinked, not all at once. One by one, eyes that had once been painted now glistened with wet recognition. The convent was waking up. Eleanor's stitched mouth twitched, the rosary links unraveling as if magnetized by Samuel's presence. Her voice, once muffled behind sacred metal, poured out not as speech, but light, a dull red glow, heavy as molasses, that clung to Samuel's skin like regret. It whispered in a language made from reversed nursery rhymes and forgotten commandments. Samuel did not run. He listened, and in listening his spine began to bend in reverence. Not forced, instinctive, because somewhere inside him, some part not bound by logic or era or flesh, recognized the chant. He had never learned it, but it had always known him. Sister Magdalena rose slowly, her bones cracking in sequence like a lock being undone. Her eyes were pure white now, devoid of iris or mercy. "You said yes," she breathed, her voice a storm contained in velvet. "Do you accept the rest of the vow?" Samuel's throat tightened, but not from fear, from certainty. "I do," he answered. And that was when the floor split open, not with destruction, but invitation. A staircase spiraled downward, impossibly long, carved from black obsidian and charred hymnals. As he stepped onto the first stair, the world above folded closed like the last page of a forbidden book. There was no going back, only deeper. Each step he took blotted history into him. He saw the first Ashford sister, not Eleanor, but Maura, carving occult symbols into her own ribs to ward off him who watches without blinking. He saw the fire in 1847, set not by accident, but to keep something in, something that had taken Sister Beatrix's voice and turned it into glass. He saw the deal made in 1903, when the last sane nun traded her tongue for the silence of the well, ensuring that what slept below remained nameless. But the name was rising now, through him. At the bottom of the stairs stood a mirror, and in it not Samuel, something wearing him. Its smile was too wide, its teeth, pages from a scorched Bible. It spoke with his voice, but not his soul. "We are ready to remember the forgetting." And behind that mirror, a door began to breathe. Not open, breathe. Because it had lungs, and behind it was not a room, but a world unmade and impatient. A world that only answered to yes. The door exhaled a slow, rasping gust that smelled like singed parchment, old blood, and the final prayer of a dying world. It didn't creak open. It parted, like flesh yielding beneath a scalpel, revealing a chamber not built by hand or design, but by belief and fear. The room pulsed with a steady heartbeat that wasn't Samuel's, or maybe it was, stretched across dimensions, echoing through time. He stepped inside. The light was wrong. Not dim, not bright, just aware. It moved when he did. It blinked when he paused. And at the center of that living room, that chapel, turned wound, stood a pillar carved from bone and ash, inscribed with 7 names, the original Ashford sisters: Maura, Beatrix, Lucia Honorine, Tabitha, Eleanor, Magdalena, and beneath their names, one more had burned itself in freshly Samuel. He didn't flinch. Not anymore. The air around him folded inward as if the room was breathing him in. With every breath, the visions returned, more vivid, more merciless. He saw the first sacrifice, when Maura offered her twin's life to seal the pact with the one who came not from heaven or hell, but from the space between prayers. He saw Lucia's betrayal, when she tried to warn the outside world, only to have her mouth sewn shut with threads dipped in holy oil and shadow. He saw Magdalena's triumph as she found the forgotten tongue, the true gospel, and wrote it on the skin of novices who then disappeared one by one, not in death, but unmaking. And now, the cycle demanded a new keeper, not a nun, not a martyr, but a witness, Samuel. He dropped to his knees before the bone pillar, not in submission, in agreement. The pillar split open, and from within stepped the shape of a girl, perhaps 12, dressed in nun's garb soaked in ancient ink. Her eyes were too large, and they reflected not light, but memory. Every moment the Ashford bloodline had ever erased, censored, or buried. "You've come far," she whispered. "I was always coming," he replied. She touched his forehead, and in that moment, he remembered, not just the convent, not just the rituals. He remembered being Mora's twin, the one sacrificed. He remembered the silence of the otherworld where the nuns drew their power. He remembered being called back, piece by piece, through bloodline, through voice, through yes.
"The house is ready,"
she said. "Then let it open," he answered. The floor shattered, not in destruction, but in transformation. Ashford Manor, from its roots to its tallest spire, unfolded like a pop-up book of cosmic history. Walls rotated, doors reversed, mirrors became windows into other existences. The entire structure lifted from reality like a lifted veil, and the world saw it. Every passerby, every townsperson, every skeptic and seeker saw the truth. The Ashford family had never died. They had only changed shape. Samuel rose. No longer merely a man, but a vessel of convergence, the bridge between the veiled and the visible. He stepped through the final archway, where time collapsed, and the first nun still blood ink into her veil, and took his place at the head of the altar, now made of moving mirrors and soft whispers. And in the town of Whitby Hollow, every bell tolled at once, not in mourning, in recognition. The Ashfords had returned, and this time the world would not forget, not ever again.